Monday morning came to Oak Ridge with a crisp chill and a brush of pale sunlight. The old street where Oaked Bank stood was lined with ivy-covered stone buildings, but none more imposing than the bank itself. Its marble facade and towering Corinthian columns gave it the air of a consulate more than a financial institution.
Jasmine Porter, 14 years old, steppait through the front door.
Her school uniform, neatly pressed blazer, pleated skirt, and polished leather shoes, couldn't mask the flicker of nerves in her eyes, mingled with a quiet pride. Today marked the first time Jasmine would handle a banking transaction alone. The $5,000 scholarship check, earned through academic excellence at the prestigious Western Academy, was tucked carefully inside her navy blue folder. Her mother, Dr. Naomi Porter, had always taught her daughter to be independent. And Jasmine had decided this would be a moment she owned completely. She approached the counter, where a young teller named Tom was working. With a polite smile, Jasmine placed the check on the marble surface along with her ID and the scholarship award letter. Behind the counter, bank manager Victoria Hayes observed from her glass-walled office. In her 40s, with sharp features, designer heels, and a habitually skeptical expression, Victoria rarely missed anything. Tom raised the check to the light, glanced at Jasmine, and subtly nodded toward Victoria. Victoria walked over, not sparing Jasmine even a glance.
$5,000
For a student. Her voice rang out just loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Where did this check come from?
Jasmine Drew Inasti Dibris.
It's a scholarship, ma'am. All the paperwork is here. Victoria took the documents, scanned them briefly, and turned away without a word. Lowering her voice, but not quite enough, she said to Tom, there are too many forgeries these days. Be cautious.
Check everything.
Jasmine stood quietly. Her phone was locked in her school locker. She had no way to call her mother. I need to let my mom know I'll be late, she said softly. That's not our concern, Victoria replied coldly.
You'll wait.
We'll notify you when we're done. Jasmine nodded, fighting the sting behind her eyes. The bank bustled around her, people passing, transactions flowing. But for Jasmine, time froze. Every glance that brushed over her made her feel smaller. A black girl in a space clearly not built for someone like her. Victoria returned to the counter, beaming at an elderly white couple as she processed their transaction with charm and enthusiasm. Jasmine noticed the difference. She had read about bias before. But now, for the first time, she felt it.
Tom murmure something to Victoria.
She frowned, glanced over at Jasmine. Keep an eye on her, she told the security guard. Make sure she doesn't try anything foolish. Jasmine clenched her fists. In her mind echoed her mother's words. When people misjudge you, let your actions be your answer. She stood still, silent, alone amid the crowd. But deep inside, something was beginning to take shape. This wouldn't just be a bad morning. This would be the start of something bigger. Jasmine Porter was not like most 14-year-old girls. Despite living in Oak Ridge, a neighborhood of manicured lawns and luxury sedans, she and her mother led a modest, thoughtful life. The Porter home wasn't flashy. Every piece of furniture had been chosen for comfort, not fashion. For integrity, not appearance. Her mother, Dr. Naomi Porter, was one of the most respected financial analysts in the banking world. Raised in a working-class family, Naomi had built her career from the ground up, earning her seat in a field notorious for keeping doors shut, especially to women of color. To Naomi, success wasn't about money, it was about values. About how a person stood tall in the storm without losing themselves. She had taught Jasmine that from the beginning. You may have been born lucky, Naomi once told her, but respect is earned not by where you start, but how far you walk on your own 2 feet.
Jasmine listened.
And lived by it. She excelled at school, not because she was pressured, but because she loved to learn. She spent weekends tutoring younger kids at the community center. She didn't rely on her mother's reputation, applying to the elite Western Academy on her own. With its acceptance rate lower than some Ivy League colleges, Jasmine's scholarship wasn't just a prize, it was a milestone.
A symbole of indépendance.
Proof that she was ready to begin standing on her own. That morning, in the sunlit kitchen, Naomi had looked up from her laptop to watch Jasmine slip the check into her folder. Are you sure you don't want me to come with you? She asked, eyes full of both concern and pride. I want to do this by myself, Jasmine replied with a smile.
I'm 14 now,
Naomi nodded. All right. But listen, if something doesn't feel right, say something.
And if no one listens, come stretto men tell me.
Jasmine had nodded, gripping her folder tightly. When she left the house, she carried more than paperwork and confidence. She carried belief, in fairness, in merit, in the idea that if you did everything right, the world would meet you there. But the bank proved otherwise. When Victoria Hayes questioned the legitimacy of her check, when the guard was told to watch her like a threat, all those lessons about justice, about earning your place, suddenly felt fragile. Jasmine couldn't reach her mother. She couldn't leave, her check was still in the bank's hands. She could only stand there. And for the first time, she truly understood. Sometimes, effort isn't enough. Because some people see skin before they see achievement. But Jasmine didn't give up. She remembered her mother's words. When you're treated unfairly, never pretend you didn't notice. And never let them think you'll stay quiet. Time moved slowly. Jasmine remained where she was, alone in the marble-clad lobby of Oaked Bank, a solitary ink blot on what the institution liked to consider its spotless canvas. She had stopped counting minutes, each one dragged on like a sentence, stretched taut with tension. Around her, the flow of customers continued, breezing in and out, but no one paused. No one asked if she was okay. Not a single glance offered sympathy. The 14-year-old girl, dressed in her crisp school uniform and clutching her folder tight to her chest, was not the image Oaked Bank wanted to present, especially not when she didn't look like most of their clientele. No one said that aloud. But everyone knew. From across the room, Victoria Hayes watched. Her gaze was sharp, laced with equal parts contempt and suspicion. Each click of her designer heels across the polished floor echoed like a warning. You don't move.
You don't speak. You don't resist.
An elderly white couple entered the bank. Instantly, Victoria's demeanor shifted.
A warm smile bloomed on her lips.
She welcomed them as if greeting royalty, personally escorting them to the VIP section, bending ever so slightly as though in service to aristocracy. Jasmine looked away, bitterness rising in her throat like bile. She wasn't naive. She had studied implicit bias. But this wasn't implicit anymore. It had a face. It had a voice. And it was standing 10 steps from her. Then, an Asian man approached the counter with paperwork in hand. Victoria didn't budge.
The system is running slow.
Could you come back later? She said with light, dismissive finality. Moments later, another white couple approached, presenting the exact same type of documents. Oh, let me take care of that for you, Victoria cooed, stepping in immediately. Please write this way.
Jasmine saw it all.
And for the first time that day, anger burned hotter than fear. But she didn't cry. She didn't shout. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out her small notebook, and with trembling hands, began to write. She noted the time. She noted names. She recorded what was said. How it was said. Who was treated how. She wasn't writing to vent. She was building a record. If the world didn't want to hear her voice, then she would make sure it had no choice but to read her truth. When Victoria motioned to the security guard, whispering just loud enough, "Keep your eye on that girl.
Don't let her go anywhere."
Jasmine didn't flinch.
She stood tall.
And in her eyes, there was no longer the gaze of a child being diminished. There was the gaze of someone who was watching, remembering, waiting, not to retaliate, but to respond. With facts. With clarity. With justice. Though she stood isolated, Jasmine understood one thing deeply. She was not alone. Because the truth stood beside her. And truth, eventually, always finds its voice. Jasmine remained still, quietly observing as though invisible in the gleaming, frigid space of Oaked Bank. But then, something strange happened. From the far end of the lobby, a man entered. Tall, composed, wearing a simple gray suit tailored with precise elegance. No one called his name. No announcement was made. But Jasmine recognized him instantly. Harrison Wells. The name echoed in her mind like a siren. Her mother had spoken of him, a formidable rival in the financial world, CEO of Meridian Banking Group, a conglomerate that had, on more than one occasion, tried to undercut her mother's firm, Porter & Company. He was not the kind of man who just showed up, especially not in a local branch like Oaked. Jasmine's eyes tracked his movements as Victoria Hayes, the same woman who had humiliated her, rushed to greet him. But she wasn't cold now. Her demeanor transformed, a soft smile, a subtle bow of respect. They exchanged hushed words. Victoria handed him a pale yellow folder marked clearly in red, confidential. Jasmine's heartbeat quickened. She stepped back slightly, tucking herself behind one of the marble columns, pretending to feel faint. But her eyes never left them. Wells flipped through the contents swiftly. Whatever was inside wasn't routine paperwork. Jasmine could tell. Then he said something brief. Victoria nodded, glowing in a way she hadn't with anyone else all day. A transaction. A betrayal. Jasmine understood. Victoria wasn't just a petty manager with a bias. She was leaking internal information, possibly client data, or worse, transaction details about Porter and Company. Jasmine's throat felt dry, but her mind was crystal clear. This was no longer about a girl being dismissed. This was about someone plotting to undermine her family's name and legacy. She reached into her bag, pulled out her notebook. Pen ready. Her hand steady. She wrote, 10:27 a.m., Victoria Hayes hands over confidential folder to Harrison Wells. Reaction, cooperative demeanor. No record of exchange via internal system. Harrison Wells, known direct competitor of Porter and Company. Meeting, not listed in bank's official schedule. As Wells exited through the front doors, his eyes swept casually across the lobby, and paused. For just 1 second, he saw her. Their gazes met. Then he turned and walked out without a word. But Jasmine knew. He had seen her. And Victoria, when she returned to the front desk, knew too. She stopped, eyes locking with Jasmine's. There was no more pretending. The look she gave Jasmine was no longer one of dismissal. It was fear. And Jasmine understood why. She was no longer just the 14-year-old girl with a check. She was a witness. And in a game this dangerous, where information is currency and silence is complicity, what Jasmine now knew could become the move that shattered the whole board.
Jasmine froze fort a moment after Victoria's final glare.
Her whole body felt like a drawn wire, tight, tense, ready to snap. Fear flickered in the back of her mind. Would Victoria try something? Would Wells return? But then she forced herself to take a deep breath. No. She would not back down. This wasn't just personal anymore. It wasn't just about a moment of discrimination. This was a conspiracy. And even at 14, Jasmine knew one thing with absolute clarity: she had to act. Across the counter, Tom, the teller who had brushed her off earlier, glanced at her from the corner of his eye. His expression had changed. No longer indifferent, now conflicted. Maybe he'd overheard bits of the exchange between Victoria and Wells. Maybe he realized this was bigger than a check. Jasmine's gaze locked onto him. An idea sparked. She walked to the counter. Her voice was quiet, but unshakably clear. Tom, I need my check and documents. Right now.
Et hésita-t-elle.
She added, calmly. If I don't get them, I'll call my mother. She's the CEO of Porter and Company, and I believe you understand just how serious this situation could become. Tom swallowed hard. A beat passed. Then, wordlessly, he turned and retrieved the file from the drawer. Jasmine double-checked everything. The scholarship check. The confirmation letter. Her identification. All intact. She hugged the folder to her chest like a shield. Then, more composed than ever, she turned and walked toward the exit. But just as her hand touched the door handle, Victoria's cold voice cut through the marble air.
Where do you think you're going, young lady?
Jasmine turned back. The entire bank had gone still. I'm going home, she said evenly. And I'm preparing a full report about this morning's incident for your board of directors, complete with your name and Harrison Wells.
Silence.
Victoria stepped forward, but Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes were steady. Her voice even.
I veux recorder everything I saw.
So either you fire me, Jasmine paused, or I fire you.
Just a matter of who move first. Victoria froze.
Her eye twitched. But no one stopped Jasmine. No security moved.
No command cam.
Jasmine pulled open the heavy glass door and stepped out.
The midday sun battait her face.
But this time, it didn't feel cold. It felt like strength. She borrowed an old landline phone from the front desk of a nearby hotel. Just one call. Mom. We need to talk. I have evidence, and I think you'll want to hear it. A chapter had just closed. But Jasmine knew, the real fight had only just begun. The sleek black car pulled into the bank's parking lot as if it had belonged there all along. The door opened smoothly, and out stepped Naomi Porter, wearing a charcoal overcoat, high heels, and eyes that carried both the weight of disappointment and the fire of pride. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She had come to reclaim justice. Inside the marble-clad lobby, the remaining customers sensed a shift in the air. It was like when a CEO walks unexpectedly into a chaotic meeting. No one speaks, but everyone stands a little straighter. Jasmine sat on the long bench, clutching her folder tightly to her chest. When she looked up and saw her mother, a complex expression flickered across her face. Relief, pride, and a touch of shame for having been mistreated. But Naomi only nodded slightly, her gaze full of affirmation. I believe you did the right thing. Victoria Hayes, still standing near the counter, looked momentarily unsettled. But as someone accustomed to power, she quickly recovered her composure. Ms. Porter, Victoria began smoothly, I apologize for the minor inconvenience this morning. You know, bank policy requires thorough verification. Naomi raised a hand, cutting her off coldly. Don't pretend, Victoria. I received the audio recording from my daughter. And I just spoke with Meridian's executive board about a senior manager at Oaked Bank leaking internal information to a competitor. She took a step forward, locking eyes with Victoria. And your name is at the top of the list. Victoria turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Naomi threw the folder onto the counter. Inside were Jasmine's written notes, a printed photo of Wells holding confidential documents, and the extracted security footage Jasmine had requested from the hotel. The entire bank lobby fell silent. Jasmine rose. She stood beside her mother. At that moment, she wasn't just a student, she was the one who had ignited the truth. You called security on me just because I was different, Jasmine said, her voice clear and steady in the hushed room. But you forgot one thing. I'm not just a girl. I'm a porter. Naomi turned to the security guard, the same one who had pulled Jasmine aside, and said in a voice that allowed no argument, escort her off the premises. Immediately. No one spoke. No one stopped it. The security guard gave a subtle nod and walked toward Victoria, not as an enforcer of abuse this time, but as an executor of justice. Victoria Hayes exited the bank, not with pride, but with her head bowed, under the eyes of every person she once dismissed. And in that moment, Jasmine was no longer just the girl who came to deposit a scholarship check. She was the one who had changed the system. 3 days after the incident at Oaked Bank, rows of news vans lined up outside the branch. The story had spread across the city like a storm, not just because a 14-year-old girl had faced discrimination, but because that girl had uncovered a high-level betrayal within a major financial institution. Inside the bank, everything felt transformed. The teller counters now bore a sign that read, "We are committed to fair and respectful service for all customers." The employees who had once stood silent as Jasmine was mistreated now welcomed clients with warmer, if slightly hesitant demeanors, as though they were still learning how to do the right thing. Melody, the young teller who had quietly tried to stand up for Jasmine, was promoted to head of customer relations. When interviewed by a local paper, she said simply, "Fairness isn't a slogan. It's an action." And Jasmine reminded us of that. At home, Jasmine received dozens of emails from classmates, teachers, and even strangers, sharing similar experiences, thanking her for speaking up when others couldn't. One afternoon after school, Jasmine was invited by the headmaster of Wester Academy to take the stage in the school's main auditorium. "We have high-achieving students. We have model students," he said. "But today I want to introduce a brave student, someone who excels not just in academics, but in ethics and courage." Jasmine walked up to a thunderous round of applause. She wore her school uniform as usual, but carried a new kind of confidence, one born not from reputation or wealth, but from lived experience. Standing before the microphone, she spoke slowly. "When young people face injustice, we're often told to stay quiet, to wait until we're older to speak. But sometimes, it's the young who see the truth the clearest. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just wrote down what I saw. And I believe anyone can do that, if they dare. The auditorium held its breath, and then erupted. Jasmine Porter was no longer just a high school student. She was a symbol. A reminder that justice doesn't wait for you to be old enough.
Justice Bégin the moment Euro brave neuf toussait, d'ici Sourang.
In the weeks following the incident at Oaked Bank, Jasmine Porter's story was no longer just a sensational headline. It became the catalyst for a wave of reform within the local banking industry. Oaked Bank was forced to take action. An independent investigation conducted by an external auditing group uncovered a series of violations, not only discriminatory practices against young and minority clients, but also collusion at the managerial level with a direct competitor, a betrayal of the trust of both clients and shareholders. Victoria Hayes was prosecuted. The evidence Jasmine provided, including her notebook entries, testimony, and a detailed account of her encounter with Harrison Wells, was considered pivotal in the investigation. Harrison Wells wasn't spared either. Following a closed-door hearing, he was forced to resign as CEO of Meridian Banking Group and now faces criminal charges for the unauthorized acquisition and use of internal documents. Meanwhile, Naomi Porter, Jasmine's mother, was invited back to assist with Oaked Bank's restructuring. But she didn't return merely as a financial expert. She set a clear condition. I will not offer support without a concrete commitment to reforming the corporate culture. And I'm not doing this for my reputation. I'm doing it because my daughter had the courage to do what many adults wouldn't. Oaked Bank immediately announced a mandatory training program on equity and professional conduct, along with the formation of an independent oversight committee that included voices from the community, notably, young people like Jasmine. At the same time, a scholarship fund named the Jasmine Porter Initiative was created to provide financial opportunities for high school students from underserved communities, those with potential often overlooked due to societal bias. Jasmine was invited to serve as the program's ambassador. When she stood before cameras to announce the scholarship, she smiled, not with pride, but with the steadiness of someone who had once been dismissed, ignored, and then chose to rise, not just for herself, but for others too. We cannot change the past, she said, but we can use it as the foundation to write a better future. And so it was, a future that began with a 14-year-old girl, a leather folder, a check, and a heart that refused to stay silent. Months after the Oaked Bank episode, Jasmine Porter walked into a familiar yet transformed setting, the main auditorium of Westridge Academy, where she had once quietly pursued academic excellence, believing that achievement alone was enough to be seen. Now every eye turned to her, not just as a top student, but as a symbol of resilience, of justice, and of what the future could be. She was invited to deliver the keynote speech at a forum on equity in education and finance. Jasmine stepped up to the podium, hair neatly tied back, voice clear and deliberate, with not a hint of hesitation in her gaze. That day, I went to the bank with a check and pride, she began. I left with a heavy heart, but with something far more valuable, the realization that if we don't speak up, injustice becomes normal. The audience, students, teachers, parents, and business leaders, sat in stunned silence. No one had imagined that a 14-year-old could make an entire system pause and examine itself. After the forum, Jasmine received a flood of invitations, from universities, nonprofits, and media outlets. But guided by her mother's thoughtful counsel, she chose only those aligned with her values. Together, Jasmine and Naomi launched a nonprofit called Project Vault, with a mission to provide financial literacy training to high school students, particularly from minority communities, offer legal counseling and independent oversight within the finance and banking sectors, ensure that no other Jasmine would ever have to stand alone in a corner again. Under Naomi Porter's continued advisement, Oaked Bank pushed forward with internal reform and became one of the first in the state to adopt an anonymous client policy, where service was based not on name, age, or race, but on documents and rights, equally applied. When asked by a reporter whether she believed she had changed the world, Jasmine smiled and replied, "I didn't change the world. I just started by reclaiming the respect that should have been mine." At age 14, Jasmine Porter had learned what many spend a lifetime trying to understand. Justice doesn't arrive on its own, it has to be named. And when one person dares to stand up, change becomes not only possible, but inevitable. A few months after the incident at Oaked Bank, Jasmine Porter stepped into a familiar yet profoundly transformed space, the main hall of Westridge Academy, where she had once studied quietly, believing that achievement alone was the key to being seen. But now every eye was on her, not just as an outstanding student, but as a symbol of resilience, of justice, and of the future. She had been invited to deliver the opening speech for the forum titled Equity in Education and Finance. Jasmine walked up to the podium, her hair neatly tied back, her voice clear and steady, with not a trace of hesitation in her eyes. That day, I walked into the bank with a check and a sense of pride. I walked out with a heavy heart, but also with something far more valuable, the clear realization that if you don't speak up, injustice becomes normal. Below the stage, students, teachers, parents, and even business leaders fell silent. No one had expected a 14-year-old girl to compel an entire system to pause and reflect on itself. Following the forum, Jasmine received a wave of invitations from universities, nonprofits, and television networks eager to bring her story to the public. But Jasmine, guided by the thoughtful mentorship of her mother, accepted only the opportunities that aligned with her values. Together, she and her mother founded a nonprofit called Project Vault, with 3 core missions: to provide financial literacy education for high school students, particularly those from underrepresented communities; to offer legal consulting and independent oversight within the financial and banking sectors; to ensure that no other Jasmine would ever have to stand alone in the corner of a room again. Under Naomi Porter's advisory leadership, Oaked Bank continued implementing reforms and soon became one of the first banks in the state to adopt an anonymous client policy, where services were rendered not based on name, age, or race, but on documents and clearly defined rights. When asked by a reporter whether she believed she had changed the world, Jasmine simply smiled and said, "I didn't change the world. I just started by reclaiming the respect that should have been mine all along." At the age of 14, Jasmine Porter had learned what many take a lifetime to understand: justice doesn't come on its own, it must be named. And when one person dares to stand, change becomes not only possible, but inevitable. 1 year after the events at Oaked Bank were brought to light, Jasmine Porter was no longer a stranger in her community. She was not only the founder of Project Vault, but also the honorary student chosen to speak at the graduation ceremony of her own school. But for Jasmine, recognition had never been the goal. On a quiet spring morning that year, she sat at her old study desk in her bedroom, watching sunlight stream through the curtains. She opened the first page of a worn brown leather notebook, the same one where she had documented every detail of that fateful day at the bank. The paper was frayed, the ink faded, but every word remained etched into her heart like a scar, not to recall pain, but to preserve memory. She was no longer the anxious 14-year-old who had been detained at the bank. Jasmine now knew how to use her voice, how to turn injustice into action, and silence into strength. Oaked Bank, after sweeping reforms, had become a model for other financial institutions to follow. They officially invited Jasmine to serve as an honorary advisor on their youth council, a program designed to include student perspectives in shaping banking policies. A year earlier, such a role would have seemed unthinkable. As for her mother, Dr. Naomi Porter, she was more than a parent, she was a partner. Together, they expanded Project Vault, forging partnerships with high schools nationwide, offering scholarships, personal finance training, and legal literacy workshops for students from vulnerable communities. Jasmine never forgot those who stood beside her. Melody, the first bank teller to quietly defend her, was now the youngest branch manager in the region. Carl, the former Oaked Bank security guard, had returned to school at night to earn his business administration degree, fully funded by Naomi herself. When asked what she was most proud of in her journey, Jasmine didn't mention awards, titles, or standing ovations. Instead, she answered, "What makes me most proud is a letter I got from a 13-year-old girl who told me that after hearing my story, she wasn't afraid to stand alone at the bank counter anymore. She knew she deserved respect." Today, Jasmine turns 15. But no one sees her as just a child. She is a symbol of a generation that dares to speak, to stand, and to create change. Not through anger. Not through violence. But through resolve, thoughtful observation, and an unshakable belief in justice. Her legacy doesn't lie in a building, a book, or a statue. It lives in every small action taken by those who came after her, young people who now know that sometimes, simply standing tall in silence, is enough to make the world listen. You don't have to be grown to do something great. You just have to begin with the right thing.